everyone, today I will discuss about modernism era in history of English literature.
Alright, let me introduce myself. My name is Annisa Rizki. I'm a student from English Literature Department Malabarmang University. I think that's enough for me, so let's get into the materials.
Modern era started from beginning of 20th century around 1920 until 1945. We can say that modernism era was marked by sudden and unexpected breaks with traditional ways of viewing and interacting with the world. Experimentation and individualism became virtues, where in the past they were often heartily discouraged. The modernism movement at this time occurred because of culture shock. The first major shock to affect this era was the Great War, which swept across Europe between 1914 and 1918, which we now know as the First World War. At the time, this war was viewed with such terrible horror that many people couldn't imagine where the world seemed to be going. Modernism era refers to the rejection of the Victorian era's traditions and the exploration of industrial age, real-life issues, and combines a rejection of the past with experimentation, sometimes for political purposes. Intellectuals and artists at the turn of this era believed the previous generation's way of doing things was a cultural dead end. As literary periods go, modernism displays a relatively strong sense of cohesion and similarity across genres and locales. Furthermore, writers who adopted the modern point of view in this era often did so quite deliberately and self-consciously. Indeed, a central preoccupation of modernism is with the inner self and consciousness. The modernists cared rather little for a nature, being, or the overarching structures of history. Also, the modernists sees decay and a growing alienation of the individual. The machinery of modern society is perceived as impersonal, capitalist, and antagonistic to the artistic impulse. Don't forget about war that most certainly had a great deal of influence on such ways of approaching the world. This era also started when writers felt they required new form of writing. As we talked earlier, the important characteristic of modern literature is that it is opposition of the Victorian writers where there was felt the need of a change in the sphere of literature. The modern writer could no longer write in the old manner. Modernist writers in general rebelled against clear-cut storytelling and formula verse from the 19th century. Instead, many of them told fragmented stories which reflected the fragmented state of society during and after World War I. Many modernists wrote in free verse and they included many countries and cultures in their poems. Some wrote using numerous points of view or even used a stream of consciousness style. These writing styles further demonstrate the way the scattered state of society affected the work of writers at the time. There are five main characteristics of modernist literature. The first one is individualism. In modernist literature, the individual is more interesting than society. The second one is experimentation. Modernist writers broke free of old forms and techniques. And the third one is absurdity. The carnage of two world wars profoundly affected writers of the period. And the fourth is symbolism, and the last is formalism. In modernist literature, it was the poets who took fullest advantage of the new spirit of the times and stretched the possibilities of their work to lengths not previously imagined. Leading up to the First World War, Imagist poetry was dominating the scene and sweeping previous aesthetic points of view. To achieve that effect required minimalist language, a lessening of structural rules, and a kind of directness that Victorian and Romantic poetry seriously lacked. Images poetry was almost always short, unrhymed, and noticeably sparse in terms of adjectives and adverbs. At some points, the line between poetry and natural language became blurred. Potential subjects for poetry were now limitless, and poets took full advantage of this new freedom. About novel, modernism introduced a new kind of narration to the novel, one that would fundamentally change the entire essence of novel writing. The unreliable narrator supplanted the omniscient, trustworthy narrator of preceding centuries, and readers were forced to question even the most basic assumption about how the novel should operate. Rather than looking out into the world, the great novelists of this century surveyed the inner space of the human mind. So, the major themes for novel in this era was satirical, war, social injustice, art, human rights, life, dissatisfaction, and futurism. At the same time, the psychoanalytic theories of Sigmund Freud had come into mainstream acceptance and became more popular and widely read. So, in this era, psychology also influenced. These two forces worked together to alter people's basic understanding of what constitutes truth and reality. There are some writers and authors at modernist era. The first one is James Joyce with Ulysses, and the second one is Thomas Stearns Eliot with The Wasteland, and last but not least, Ezra Loomis Pound with The Cantos. So, after knowing about modernist era, I can conclude and learn that because of major factors or events such as the World War I that occurred at the time and also rejections that occurred in the modernist era, especially the rejections of Victorian ideas, it gave an effect, especially in the literature at the time. This rejection proves that literary works also develop from time to time.
And that's all for me. I'm sorry if there are any mistakes such as wrong information or my English or even my pronunciation. Thank you for your attention. Good luck everyone!